Geico asks, how would you love a chance to save some money on insurance? Of course you would. And when it comes to great rates on insurance, Geico can help. Like with insurance for your car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and RV. Even help with homeowners or renters coverage. Plus, add an easy-to-use mobile app, available 24-hour roadside assistance and more, and Geico is an easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways you could save. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com or contact your local agent today.
Live from wherever you happen to be, it's the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. And now, here's your host, curator of the Hall, Jamie Dew.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. This is it. This is episode 30. Which means there are no nominees left to announce. What's that you say? But Jamie, this is episode 30. There's one more to announce. Well, I'm about to change things. Before I make any changes, though, could you please all wipe your feet before you walk into the hallowed grounds of the Hall of Fame? I don't need your muckety-muck on my floor. So, how you doing? I'm great. I'm pumped. Voting opens tomorrow and runs through May the 20th. But I'm bearing the lead here. What's changed? Well, there's two things that have changed. There are now officially less people to vote for when you cast your votes tomorrow, or the next day, or any day until the 20th of May. You see, the steering committee, the board of governors of the SNL Hall of Fame got together and made a radical decision. It seems that one of the things that's getting in the way of people sort of wrapping their heads around what we're doing here at the Hall of Fame with a curated list of nominees and not just starting, at the start, is that we've announced this as the first class. And the first class should, be somewhat honorific or special. And so we've come to the conclusions that Lorne Michaels has been removed. Lorne Michaels has been removed as a nominee, and instead of being nominated, Lorne Michaels will be the inaugural class, effective today. He is the inaugural class of the SNL Hall of Fame. It's a cast of one, and it's Lorne Michaels. I can't think of anything more fitting. As the interview that we're going to listen to today suggests, without Lorne, there is no Saturday Night Live. Ergo, there's no SNL Hall of Fame. So it only makes sense to put the Grand Poobah in there. So, Lorne, congratulations. You are now officially in the SNL Hall of Fame. Wow. And you will be joined by the first voted class of the SNL Hall of Fame when we announce that on the 22nd of May, 2022. My good gracious. This is going to be exciting. Here is the other change we have made. You did have up to 10 votes to cast in the Hall of Fame. Now, that has been upped by 50%, and you will have up to 15 votes to cast. You don't have to cast all 15, but you can. You have 15 to vote with. It'll make more sense when you see the voting form, but I can't wait for you to see it. And like I said, it'll be one name lighter, with Mr. Michaels now being put into the SNL Hall of Fame. So there's that. This would be a real short episode because we're not nominating anyone today. So I thought that I would just simply replay the premiere episode interview with Mr. Andrew Clark who nominated Lorne Michaels. Lorne Michaels was the first nominee, and now he's the first actual Hall of Famer. Oh, yes, he will be getting a plaque. I'm going to do something to get Mr. Michaels a plaque. For God's sake, he deserves a plaque. He's in the Hall of Fame. At any rate, that's what I've got for you. Let's go to the interview now with Andrew Clark, nominating Lorne Michaels successfully into the SNL Hall of Fame.
No Lorne Michaels, there's no Saturday Night Live. So I think it all stems from there, Yeah.
We're done here. That's it.
Sounds good. All right.
Andrew, what's your history with Saturday Night Live?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it debuted when I was around 9 or 10. When I was old enough to stay up and watch it, I was watching it, and was particularly influenced, say, by Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. When John Belushi sadly died, my friends and I had a toga party wake in his honor, and for which I got in trouble. I forgot to take the safety pins out of the sheets in my house, and therefore my parents caught me. But we were really, really into the Saturday Night Live aesthetic, and particularly those guys. And then it just kept going. And if you're interested in comedy or a comedy fan, you're always keeping an eye on Saturday Night Live. You may not watch it all the time, but you certainly keep an eye on it. And now with people being able to record it, watch it any time, I mean, their audience is probably, continuing to expand.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it seems that it really is people of all ages watching at this point. So for more than 40 years, it's been a fixture of late night television.
Yeah. And I also think like Lorne Michaels, he's a sports fan. I mean, he's certainly a baseball fan. And so I think he really saw the show when he came back to it as a franchise, in the same way that the coach of the team doesn't have the same players every year, that Saturday Night Live was going to kind of rejuvenate itself every year, and in fact, probably turn over entirely every 5 years or so. And that has turned out to be the show's single greatest engine, I think. And he's been a very, very good judge of comedy talent. And he's had some really great people scouting for him too, right? It's not I think he would tell you it's not just a Lorne Michaels enterprise. Like, it's a very big tent with lots of people working underneath it. But, when you look at his ability to transcend the comedy that he started out doing as a younger man and sort of keep up, that's pretty remarkable. A lot of people don't do that. They can't really go generation after generation because they get a bit too hung up on understanding it. I remember interviewing Lorne Michaels in 95, I think it was, or 96, for the first time. And he was just talking about some new cast members, among them Adam Sandler was at the time, I think David Spade, Chris Rock. And he said, I'm getting a lot of heat in some respects because people are not getting these guys, especially the older executives and stuff at the network. But he said, and I don't entirely get it, but I know it's funny. And that always kind of struck me, the ability to say, even though I may not completely get this, I still can know and sense that it's funny. And then that allows you to keep going and sort of where we are now, which is their debuted, I think it was in 75. So, we're going to get pretty close to the 50th anniversary pretty soon.
Yeah, this is season 46 right now.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. So they've been doing it for a while. He's quite the tastemaker. So going back to your initial statement, there is no Saturday Night Live without Lorne Michaels. I think, if you look through his history, you almost see a breadcrumb trail form. Was he destined to do a show like this?
Well, you could argue maybe. I mean, if you look at his upbringing, he's a Toronto kid. He grows up going to CNE and doing all those sorts of things. Unfortunately, his father, I think, passes away when he's around 14. And a few years later, he starts dating Rosie Schuster, who's the daughter of Frank Schuster, right? And so Frank, in some ways, becomes a bit of an extra parental figure or father figure. I'm not saying a replacement or anything like that, but a kind of male role model that Lorne Michaels kind of grows up talking to about comedy and studying. And at the same time, he's enjoying all the 60s counterculture. He goes through U of T, where he meets Hart Pomerantz. And so they start doing comedy, and you've got Hart and Lorne, and he spends some time in England where he gets to know the Pythons. And he's going to spend time in Los Angeles doing TV and all of that kind of stuff. So he's sort of got a hybrid of British humor, American humor, and that kind of weirdly fatalistic Canadian sensibility. And I think the other thing is he had a great sense of how to bridge the different aspects that can go into commercial TV production. So he could be completely in sync with, say, the not ready for primetime players, whose whole idea was they hated television, and also in sync with the Suits on the top floor. I think Rockefeller Center is 34 floors, and his office, I think, at one time was on the 17th, which I always thought was a little symbolic because it's like you're right in between. So he was able to keep the show going. Shows like the Smothers Brothers eventually kind of imploded because they couldn't navigate that. Now, whether they should have, I'm not arguing that, but they were very counterculture. They were against Vietnam and pretty, out there and strident about it. And eventually they were pulled off the air. I mean, Saturday Night Live has had its share of controversies. There was one recently, but it's sort of always able to navigate those. And I think a big part of that is Lorne Michaels has that really great knack. And also that combination of British, American, and Canadian sensibilities, which nowadays I don't think is as important, because I don't think the British influence in Canada is anywhere near what it was, say, in the 60s or the 70s. But at that time, it was a big part of, what was happening in terms of culture in Canada. You got stuff from England much sooner than anyone in the United States, generally speaking.
Interesting. I never really put the third side to that triumvirate with the British piece. I knew he was a giant Pythons fan, but I didn't realize that he had spent time there.
Oh yeah, he spent time living in Shepherd's Bush, and he would go and watch the Pythons and watch them, I think, filming the show. And when you see the first seasons of Saturday Night Live, you see, there's animation, there's Land Shark,
Muppet.
Things like that kind of absurd. And even the idea of ending a sketch without ending a sketch. Those are all things you could kind of see the Pythons doing and then him kind of picking up on. I mean, the show is very original, but it is also an interesting example of the baby boomer generation, which is the first generation to grow up in front of the electronic babysitter, as Dave Thomas called the television once when I was talking to him. And so a lot of what they're doing is a reaction against television and its kind of authority and power.
Right.
So commercial parodies, making fun of the news, all of those sorts of things are part of that. And I also think doing political humor, which Lorne Michaels was told was suicidal. Like, no one wants it. Don't do it. He kind of stuck to his guns. We have a long history of political kind of humor in Canada and in Britain too. And there's a rich history in America of political humor. But at the time, you didn't find much of it on network television. You had to look elsewhere. And he sort of, I think, championed that. And again, so the show is somewhat of a tribute to live television, the golden age, all of that kind of stuff, Howdy Doody. And at the same time, it's a complete rejection of it. So it's a neat hybrid, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, completely. And it's a hybrid that couldn't have come, at a different time. Like, I really don't think like comedy was going through this, this disillusionment, this renaissance. Like, you had Lampoon doing biting satire and a lot of really cool things there. And then Lorne comes along and, sort of from the pages of Lampoon and that ethic, creates SNL. He's got to go in the hall, right?
I would say he should win and he should be elected. That's kind of like saying, no, I can't I'm going to make some religious analogy that's going to offend lots and lots of people, so I won't do that. But I would say that, without Lorne Michaels, there is no Saturday Night Live. And, I think that it's, whenever you do something like this, there's always an element of winking or an asterisk. And by that, I mean, you can never say definitively who is the absolute, obviously, right? And in fact, we all have our favorite cast, right? And it tends to be the cast that you watch between age 14 and 17 or 14 and 16. You're old enough to stay up, but not really old enough to be allowed to go out. And so you're home watching Saturday Night Live. Now that's changed a little bit because people can watch it online and all sorts of other things. But I think people always have their favorite cast members, their favorite seasons. I think the quality has generally always been pretty great. I mean, they ran the headline Saturday Night Live or Saturday Night Dead, I think the year after it started. So they were already calling for its demise in like 1976.
Wow.
And, they're still waiting. No, I mean, it wasn't, some people hated it. And then, the years where Lorne Michaels wasn't there, they had talented cast members, but I just think that the people in charge didn't understand the show.
Right.
I mean, you had Eddie Murphy, who went on to become a star. You had Robin Duke. You had, a lot of great people. And, if you talk to them, like Robin teaches at Humber, she'll say, oh, yeah, when we were on the show, people, they didn't like us, some of them. We'd have people on the street saying, hey, you've wrecked Saturday Night Live. And, it's crazy, right? People take it way too personally. I think the other thing that people have to remember is that comedy is not a sure thing. And by that, I mean, if Saturday Night Live never had a sketch that didn't work, then they'd never have a really great sketch. You kind of always have to wonder, if you're not worried about going too far, you probably haven't gotten far enough. And by that, I don't mean offending people just for the sake of it, which is kind of dull. But I mean, when you're in that zone and you think you want to make a point, you go for it, being willing to suffer the consequences of it. And I think that that's an important element of the show. And then again, if you look at the head writers, people are like Jim Downey. I mean, he and Norm Macdonald were fired from the show for doing those O.J. Simpson's bits. And I remember we had Jim come up to Humber and him sort of saying, yeah, we just couldn't stop. And, they kept waiting for Lorne to really lower the boom, but he just kind of let them go. And then eventually they got fired and that was it, but he sort of said it was like a compulsion. Like they knew they should stop, but they couldn't stop. It was just too big of a thing. Anyway, those kinds of stories, I think, are why people, in some respects, really love the show. And probably to a degree that if you see people, there are a lot of people who have animosity towards the show. I think it just shows it's relevant. If everybody loves you and nobody hates you, you're probably doing something wrong as well.
That's fair. How important do you think it is that he got to not only birth the show, but then come back and, have a second run?
I think it was critical. I think the show would have gone under if he hadn't. I think that the other thing that happened with him when I've interviewed him is he sort of talked about going through a period where he felt like what he was doing wasn't, I don't know how to put the right word, credible enough. That if you were a serious fill in the blank, then you would be doing feature films or you would be doing X, Y, or Z. And so the idea of doing sketch comedy and this kind of stuff, it's the proverbial not being able to sit at the grown-ups table. And I think, as he described it to me, there was a process of him going, no, wait a minute, this is actually what I'm really enjoyed doing, what I'm good at, and it's got a lot of value. And so I think that that's been instrumental in him staying with the show as long as he has, I think. because it's not an easy process, and I'm sure it's not perfect. I've never had the chance, obviously, to work on the show, but having observed it and interviewed a lot of people over the years, it's not an easy environment, but it produces some really great stuff. And if you look at the way it's molded the American, Canadian, and I would say in a lot of respects the global sense of humor, it's astounding. There really isn't as many comedy institutions that have done that. SCTV took a different approach. They didn't become a franchise. They were SCTV. Martin Short joined, Robin Duke joined, Harold Ramis left, but basically that was it. That cohort, and then it's done. And they went on to do all sorts of other really great stuff. So, they had an enormous impact. I mean, it cannot be overstated. But over time, I think Saturday Night Live has had the larger one because of the sheer volume of the talent that is.
Yeah, when you look at that list of people who have, been in and out of that machine, it's astounding. You mentioned earlier about the sports franchise, sort of analogy. And I wonder then that makes Lorne Michaels, sort of the owner or the GM, assembling the people to, I guess, disseminate the taste making among many different people. How has he managed to do that all these years?
Well, I think that, it's funny when I've interviewed him, he's always left me with something that I remembered. I remember him saying, "You can ask for anything in the world except to be appreciated." And he also said, "Never do business with someone you wouldn't have lunch with." Stuff like that, which I've often remembered over time. But, I think he hires the people he really believes in, and then he trusts them. And he also has, I am pretty sure he still has the final say. So it's still about, did you make Lorne laugh? And then you have a really good chance of it getting on the show. I think one of the things that's kind of neat about Saturday Night Live is that say MacGruber, which is probably my favorite film of all time, was this crazy sketch that nobody really wanted to put on, and something got cut, so it finally got a shot. So a show like Saturday Night Live is a place where an idea like that can sort of keep going around the track or the conveyor belt until maybe the time is right, where other shows that might not happen. So I think that's how he does it. He trusts his instincts. He's smart, and he also has final say. And I think he has a pretty good, some of the directions he's given people, I think are really telling. Like telling people, don't always try so hard, for instance, in comedy. And just kind of interesting little bits and pieces that you hear the people who've gone through there citing as they move forward, and it's interesting. They should have a book of like Lornisms or something. put it out.
That'd be great. Well, maybe we'll sell it in the SNL Hall of Fame gift shop. Who knows? To wrap it all up, I mean, you've really done a great job of outlining, how he got here and, what he's managed to create and the fact that it wouldn't be there were it not for him. So I just wonder if there's any sort of tags that you want to add on to your argument for why Lorne Michaels belongs in the SNL Hall of Fame.
Well, I think he's also funny. I mean, he might beg to differ, but I think he did a good job in Hart and Lorne. I know that I think he gets maybe a little bit, cringy when he sees that stuff. But, I think he has a very dry sense of humor. He's a pretty funny guy. And I think that's the other thing. I mean, just again, this isn't necessarily from the interviews I had, because normally when you're sitting down with someone, like, you're having a fairly serious interview. But Will Forte talking about filming the scene in MacGruber where he's naked humping the air, and Lorne Michaels like kind of having him do it over and over because he was laughing so hard. So I guess what I would say is there's the lesson there for people who are starting out in comedy is if you can keep that, I'll call it childlike delight in laughing, that'll probably help your career a lot. Like to have been around that long and to have seen so much comedy and still get a kick out of something so ridiculous, I think it just shows an openness to comedy, which I think is pretty great. I think some people have misunderstood maybe Lorne Michaels a little because he is Canadian, and I don't like to generalize too much. But maybe Canadians, at least back in the 60s and 70s, weren't quite as brash, perhaps. So people would misunderstand a measured kind of demeanor or reply as being a little bit kind of cool, when in fact it's just kind of a Canadian affectation, right? So people think you're really nice and polite, and really what you're doing is storing up all your bile and venom and getting ready to unleash it later, which is a very Canadian trait, right? Yes. And I think that for all of those things, he's been integral. He's a tricky one to nail down because he's not a comedian. You can't say, okay, Mike Myers, okay, he's a genius, and his Peter Sellers is an obvious antecedent, right? Like, you can see it. Lorne Michaels, it's not quite as easy because he's an impresario and a very influential producer. And, he had, like, again, I remember the kids in the hall talking, I think it was with Kevin or Bruce, they wanted, when they did Brain Candy, they had a great director do it, and one that they'd work with a lot. But Lorne had really suggested George Roy Hill, who had done, The Sting, Butch Cassidy, and who had a real knack for capturing kind of male rebellious energy. And you kind of wonder, I wonder. It doesn't mean that director did a bad job. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, under that tutelage, how would the movie have appeared? It's an interesting, and so it's that kind of ability, I guess, almost like a chemist, to say, what are the ingredients I have, if you will, or you can call it a chef, whatever you like. What are the chemicals I have, and how do I put these together in the right proportions at the right time to create something really special? He has repeatedly been able to do that. And there are not a lot of folks out there who can claim that. So that's why I would say it is the Lorne Michaels Saturday Night Live Hall of Fame. If you ask me.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Andrew. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, if they do want to, then there's perhaps something a little wrong. But I have a website, andrewclark.ca, and I have a regular column in the Globe and Mail every week about driving. I write a humor column about driving called The Road Sage, and I'm the coordinator of the comedy writing performance program at Humber College. So it's a great job because I get to see lots of comedians develop, and people like Vance Banzo, Tim Blair, who are on Tall Boys, and there's a lot of people out there from Humber doing really great stuff. So it's a fun gig. So if you're deluded enough to want to be in comedy and you come to Humber, then you'll definitely get to know way more about me than you would ever have hoped or dreamed.
Well, that's fantastic. Thanks for taking some time this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Been fun.
Thanks a lot.
And just like that, we have wrapped up. That's it. That's 30 episodes. Voting begins tomorrow. You can't vote for Lorne Michaels, but you've got up to 15 votes. Those are the headlines from today's episode. So I hope you enjoyed yourself. I'm going to fill you in a little bit on what the next couple episodes are going to be, and then we'll bid adieu. Over the next few weeks, I get together with some notable podcasters, journalists, and superfans to live pick their SNL Hall of Fame ballots. So they will choose up to 15, and they will actually make the votes. It's going to be exciting. It should be really cool. And we're going to do that for the next couple weeks. So stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy them. But that's pretty much what I've got for you this week. So do me a big favor, would you? On your way out, as you passed the light switch on the wall, give it a flick for me, because the SNL Hall of Fame is now closed.
Thanks for listening to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. You can find everything you need to know about the show at snlhof.com. Don't forget to subscribe, share, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. This is Doug Denant saying, this is Doug Denant saying, see you next month in the Hall.
Podcasts and such.
Geico asks, how would you love a chance to save some money on insurance? Of course you would. And when it comes to great rates on insurance, Geico can help. Like with insurance for your car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and RV. Even help with homeowners or renters coverage. Plus, add an easy-to-use mobile app, available 24-hour roadside assistance and more, and Geico is an easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways you could save. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com or contact your local agent today.
It's clear to you that de-icing the wings will not be done in a jiffy. You look for phone outlets but see none, only photos of phone outlets. A voice announces your gate is now 39C, 12B, 9A. It's like musical chairs, if musical chairs made you sob in the pet relief area. A child picking his nose stares. His parents have abandoned him. The airport will raise him now.
Don't let flight delays ruin your vacation. Go on a real vacation. GoRVing.com.